Welcome to another special edition episode of the podcast to celebrate the launch of the You've Got This book. I'd love to hear if you have, and I'd love to hear what you think, so please do feel free to leave a review. I would be wildly grateful. Now, if you have read the book, and even if you haven't, today's podcast, you're just going to love it. I spoke to Emma Bridgewater, who's the founder of her amazing brand, and she started this when she couldn't find a gift for her mother. She identified a gap in the market, and it basically started a lifelong love of Stoke-on-Trent, where the factory is still based today. It also started lots and lots of learning and the development of a brand that employs people in Stoke-on-Trent and in London that is still part of so many people's lives, with many kitchens being full of Emma Bridgewater work. I'm so grateful for Emma for finding the time to speak to me. She's just a complete legend. Her journey is amazing, and the way she talks about everything is just so lovely. You're going to love this episode. I really hope you do. So I won't say much. I'll point questions at you. But the first one is obviously about your business journey, because Emma Bridgewater is such an incredible brand. I mean, if there's a kitchen that doesn't have a mug in it in the UK, let alone beyond, I'd be surprised. So can you tell me how it all started?
It's an oft-told tale, but it's sort of startlingly simple. I was looking for a birthday present for my mum, and I wanted to give her 2 cups and saucers. It was clear in my mind that said, I love you, I miss you, I wish we were sitting down together drinking coffee right now. And we will soon. So it was a sort of intention. It was like nice memories and nice intentions, and I was all full of that idea. I was really excited, and I ran into there was still, this is a long time ago, 84. There were still China shops, sort of rather old fashioned, and I rushed into one in Oxford, and stopped short, realizing they had no idea what my mum's kitchen was like, and they were severely in error in that hers was a famously welcoming and popular and marvellous kitchen, very, very lovely place to be. And when she and my dad parted in 68, I think, she left home in a hurry and didn't take her wedding china. And when she went back for stuff, there was lots of the formal things, elements of her life pertaining to the 50s when they got married, she left behind. And she sort of rushed, she moved to Oxford, and she moved into the 60s. And she and her friends were great pioneers of the whole sort of David Benaric look. I think he formalized it and kind of put it out into the world, of rush matting and bright coloured painted walls, and a much more informal, mismatched kind of thrown together look. Not luxurious, quite kind of glamorous in its carelessness, I think, probably, if I can work it out. Because people often talk about this as a luxury brand. It's anti-luxury. Luxury is absolutely the last thing on my mind. I've never had any interest in it. But of course it is luxurious because they're expensive. But it's to do with something more devil-may-care than luxury.
It's functional, isn't it? They're big, chunky pieces that are...
Yeah, they're robust and colourful, and they're intended to be a collection that you build ad hoc, as her kitchen china was. So I literally stood in that china shop and thought, well, good Lord, how extraordinary. Nobody's making what we need. And I literally had a kind of hallucination on the spot of what there should be on one wall of this shop was a kitchen dresser, just like I'd always known the china to live on. But making a great sort of life collage, because there were lots of sort of, I don't know, hats and keys and bridesmaids bunches and little cups that I won at school for posture or running or something. And I thought it should be there in the shop. And I could dimly see what the cups and saucers and pottery. I didn't actually know, and I'd not been to art school. I went to university. I read English literature. I thought I was going to go into publishing. Kind of wish I had in lots of ways. But I accidentally took this strange road, a strange and very, very sort of bumpy and exciting road. In that, when I'd had that vision of a dresser in a shop covered in colourful mismatched pottery, I thought, I've got to work this out. And I'd been working for a year or more for some girls who were, they had a business called Warm and Wonderful. And their knitwear was witty and gorgeous, and they were witty and gorgeous, and their business was very, very stylish, and extremely successful and quite chaotic in ways that I very, very much enjoyed, and I learned a lot from them. The Princess of Wales, to be, wore a jersey, red, white sheep, one black one. That was them. And I arrived to help just when that story had hit the papers, and every woman in the Western world seemed to want that jersey. And they made with outworkers. I mean, they were all craft made pieces, and much as I loved the results, I had a year of the process of trying to get things made by craftswomen at home to fashion deadlines for New York. And I thought in my innocence that if I found a factory to make this ceramic idea that was kind of bumping around in my head, it would all be really easy.
Right.
So ridiculous, nearly 40 years later, to think that I thought it was going to be easy. But and within the next few days, I bumped into a friend who I knew he would know. He was sort of grown up, a graphic designer, very successful, plenty of them about in the 80s. And he actually had in his pocket at a party the business card of a bloke in Stoke who he'd just been working with, a very good model maker. And he said, "Okay, here it is, write his number down." No, I'm keeping the card. Put his number on your fag packet and call him tomorrow. Make a date, and then sit down and you know what you want. Draw those shapes. If you've got the date with him, it'll make you do it. This is typical of my life. And then come and see me when you've been to see him, and make that soon. And I did exactly what he said. Rang Sam the next morning, made a date about 10 days hence, feeling quite nervous about my drawings. Got that together. The same half pint mug shape, a little bowl, which is still in the range, a milk jug still in the range, and a dish, a sort of 12-inch shallow dish. I'd hoped for plates as well, but I thought I didn't really need to design them. And then I took a train. I discovered that you went to Euston Station. I got a train to Stoke-on-Trent. Got off thinking, perhaps it's much colder than London. Got into a taxi and thought, wow, there's no suspension, and it's a very, very different experience altogether. And we shot through a city that I was utterly romanced by, because there were the battered, fascias of iconic factories, Minton and Masons and Spode, and I mean, it was all the great gods of particularly my grandmother's china cupboards. But the place was clearly, it looked like World War III had broken out last night, but it had specifically been waged in Stoke-on-Trent. I was astonished by what turned out to be a post-industrial landscape.
Yeah.
The result of not just Margaret Thatcher, but a continuous series of governments despairing of union politics and bad management, I would say, and kind of plan to step away from heavy industry, and making no provision for what that was going to do to the populations of those places. I mind about that very, very much. And I think, Orgreave, which was happening that year, not far from Stoke-on-Trent, was the beginning, and that's where the Brexit trail started. We let them down. It was an appalling breach of faith, a terrible, terrible thing. And I was all of that hit me hard, and I felt very, very I fell into a very complicated relationship with the city. I was entirely hooked, and I felt strangely compelled to tackle a completely unsolvable problem, really, because there is, I don't know, there's, some of those cities are still struggling, and Birmingham's recent near bankruptcy is all part of the same story. We haven't we're too London-centric, economically, politically, culturally. Those cities, even the ones that took, like Birmingham, that have been supremely successful at reinventing themselves. Because Birmingham was the making city it was the factory of the world, the workshop of the world, I think it was known as. We've lost so much, and the idea that we don't make everything that we need appalls me.
I can understand that, because I live in Kidderminster, which was like the carpet making factory of the world, and they're just abandoned now.
All gone.
And it is
and things
sad.
that's done to hill farmers, and it's the whole. So as I was talking to someone about that, and she said, "Oh yes, seagrass, death of sheep farming." You think, oh my God, that's complicated.
But it's we live in quite a rural area, and the farmers are saying like it costs them more to shear their sheep than the wool's worth, and they have to basically burn the wool because that's the cheapest thing to do. And you're like, how is this okay?
Yeah. Well, they've got to diversify in all sorts of ways, and oh God, we've got to be so ingenious. But so I fell for Stoke, and the guy Terry, the graphic designer, had sent me to was a godsend, and he took a chance on me, suspecting rightly that I could probably muster a couple of £100 each visit. Not much more than that. I was waitressing to keep body and soul together, and I had a small catering escapade with a cousin. Thank God we didn't kill anyone. But I was absolutely living on nothing, as air mostly. And he made me those 4 shapes. He modelled them, and I went back a few days, like a fortnight later to see 2 of them, and then another fortnight later to see the other 2. Meanwhile, he'd made the moulds and started to cast me some.
Right.
And so when I was back in London in between visits, I was frantically trying to work out how to decorate them, because I've got that fatal thing of a great knowledge of what I like and what I approve of, and what looks nice. And I think of myself as artistic, and I'm very, very confident about my kind of taste and all that. But I didn't actually have the drawing ability at all. But I stumbled on sponge printing, which had completely gone out of, it hadn't been, none of the factories had seen it for decades. A couple of old blokes came out of the woodwork and said they remembered it in their sort of young years in a couple of the factories, but it was a 19th century thing primarily, and a really great, simple, a very effective way of putting and very right for the 80s, simple graphic patterns. And that really appealed to me, because I strained my sketchbook, and it all happened very fast. I sampled lots of designs. I sold samples frantically, the ones I didn't want or that I'd got to enough of. I was buying them in the biscuit fired ware in all 4 shapes quite quickly, in little batches from Sam, taking them down to Brixton, experimenting, coming up with the designs I liked. I learned to glaze myself. We installed I'm hugely indebted to my boyfriend at the time, a long-suffering photographer, practical, and he was very much sort of part of the first few months. And when we broke up, we sort of an arrangement. And in fact, he makes spongeware too, which I'm all for. He's called Brixton Pottery, I think, now, but he makes abroad. But he and his brother rigged up a kiln, and I literally glazed and fired my samples, sold the excess in Covent Garden on Sundays. Really, really tricky winter. Age 45. And then I put together a collection. I mean, it does seem ridiculous talking about it now. I was 23, and I'm so convinced, but I guess that's because what you don't know makes you stronger in a way. I didn't know what the risk was.
No, I love that.
Felt, well, if I'll run my loan as far as the bank will let me, and if it doesn't work, I'll convert it into a loan, and I'll get a job and pay it back. It didn't really sort of seem to be a problem.
I'm just saying to Sarah, I think that's a really good thing to be talking about, because I think nowadays people think they can't even experiment without having investors and this, that and the other, and actually I think a lot of the time they don't need to go to that step as step one.
You're so right. I often talk to people who are swithering about an idea and tremendously protective of it, and I say, sometimes it's jam making or something, and I say, well, are you doing it and selling it at a craft market, and do you know that people push each other out of the way to get hold of it? Because unless you've got a product that people are absolutely demented about, they really, really like, and you absolutely can see you sell out every time, don't bother. Or keep working. I mean, not to bother. Keep working.
Yeah. Improve
your proposition. Sharpen it until it is what people want. But you can do a lot of that. I mean, unless you're planning something very big and complicated. But if you haven't got any capital, that's probably not a good idea. there's lots you can do with most business models in, just in a very, very handmade way. And that's, so I didn't make any production there. Once I'd sent out a flyer, I looked up 200 shops. I looked at my favourite magazines, and I used various products as markers. If they were selling, actually now I can't remember what any of them were, any of the things. But, I took a tip from Terry again, which is pick various sort of stationery products and stuff that he said, if they're selling them, they'll probably sell what you're making.
Sure.
And I rang each one to get the name of the right buyer. And I took with Alex's, another who lived in Alex's house in Brixton, which had been a squat. It was good fun. There were some creative types there. Took a picture on his kitchen dresser, and I stuck that on the flyer and a handwritten postcard saying, and there were prices and a bit of the story, pretty much what I've just told you. Well, no, it's a bit more about the history of Spuntware probably, but it was only 200 words, but it looked nice. And the note said, I hope you don't mind, I'll call you in the next few days to see if I can make an appointment to come and visit you. Almost all of them said yes. The ones that didn't said, I'm a gallery, you've done the wrong place, you need the kitchen shop over the road, gave me the name and number.
Wow.
Almost all of them ordered when I went round to see them. I mean, it's kind of bizarre. There's always luck in business success. It was the right product at the right moment. And some of them are still with us.
Oh, wow.
So, Rossiter's of Bath is a legend. The General Trading Company was my kind of prop and stay. They were marvellous, and the buyer there taught me a lot. She sort of took me under her wing and tutored me quite a lot, mentored me. They don't exist anymore, though, so that's not very helpful. But so that, and within April in 1985, so very short time after I'd first been to Stoke, I was setting up a trade fair stand.
Wow.
And I did top drawer. And it was small, and it was in Jerry and Tom's, and it was really good fun. It was quite a new endeavour. I was just what they wanted. It went really well. And I didn't really know what a trade fair was, but I was good at parties, and my stand was always a riot. Mostly my friends and family blocking the way, drinking all the drink, and shouting at each other. But I eventually had to clear the decks to let the buyers in, and the buyers were very enthusiastic. It was very expensive. It was precisely twice the price of anyone else's earthenware mug, which was good. It meant it didn't although everyone wanted it, they were slightly alarmed by the price. So the sort of pace of it. So there's an important, useful lesson there about. Too much defence there. There's one free here. So there's about don't underprice yourself.
I think sometimes that is people's go-to, isn't it? They think, I need to get it into market. If it's cheap, people will buy it. But then I suppose you've got the issue of you're going to have to increase that price at some point to make it a business. You
want to get your margins organised right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And explain the price is part of the story. This is why people understand stories.
Yeah.
And kind of live by stories.
Sure. So from that, how did that, because at this point, were you still doing all the glazing and that aspect of it yourself?
Sam and I had talked, and he was making production for me. I taught his decorators to do the patterns. He and I, talked to the colour supply. I taught his decorators. There were two lovely ladies, Anne and Marie, and I taught them to do the first pattern. And off we went. And he was supplying direct to the customer. No, I delivered them all for the first 2 or 3 rounds. I had a big Luton and drove them around the country myself.
Wow. And
that was quite fun. So I kind of had a very good hands-on relationship with the shops. And therefore I was able to, I wrote the invoice was dated the day I delivered it. And I gave them 28 days, and Sam had given me 30 days, and I thought, what could possibly go wrong? It'll be fine. As long as half of them pay on time. Didn't cross my mind they wouldn't. Anyway, it was the beginning of learning how to management's cash or not, as the case may be.
So you went from then, you had someone else was kind of fulfilling it for you. How did that then scale to where you are now? Because obviously it's a very different animal nowadays.
Well, how did it scale? Gradually. It didn't grow half as quick as I wanted it to, I also started without a business plan, which I think, by the time I wrote a business plan, I'd been trading for 3 or 4 months. And my bank manager freaked out, but he had been used to me overdrawing and getting a job and paying him back. I mean, it's such a different world, I guess. But I basically had fairly good credit rating with him, but then he'd suddenly spotted that something very odd was going on in this new account of mine. And my riposte to him was, have you got someone in the team who'll help me write a business plan? And that instinct of asking for help is probably much easier for women to do than men. But to begin with, there's always advice, and there's lots of people who come and persecute you, like the VAT man. They came and gave me a tutorial. The council closed me down because I was by then living in a cousin's house in Chelsea, and the neighbours really didn't like the Stoke deliveries coming and often being dropped in their basements and that kind of thing. And they complained to the council. The council came to close me down, and I hit the man who came to serve the thing on me. I asked for his help. We ended up driving around industrial estates in Battersea. Wow. And all over the place. There is help at hand.
What have the kind of, obviously through a business journey like you've had, there are going to be some things that will have definitely jumped out in the category of a block, or something that slowed you down, changed your trajectory, was a lot more difficult than you expected.
Oh, children.
Oh God, yeah, I've got 2 of those.
I'll just tell you, you can't have it all.
Okay.
I mean, I, as it were, did, but the business grew in a very haphazard and slow way. I established the brand almost instantaneously, as I say, really because it was what everyone was looking for. So family. I mean, I started the business, when I was single, and Matthew and I met at Top Drawer about 4 or 5 shows later, and married very quickly and started having children. I mean, I was 27 when we got married, 29 when I had Elizabeth.
Wow.
And it was, what are the blocks? How much energy have you got?
Yeah.
I have learned along the way not to waste their time by urging people to push on with their business idea. If you need urging, you shouldn't be doing. I mean, you certainly shouldn't be doing. And I would almost actively discourage women setting out. I mean, it's not discouraged. I would say it's going to be really tough. Are you up for it? And there's there are so many sort of hidden complications. Your success can be very troublesome within your own family. The power dynamics of it are totally unintended. The unintended consequences. The mileage. Geez, I've driven a lot of miles. Because what I knew from the outset was that I would have a customer-facing London office. So that's where the commercial's always been. And always wanted to make in Stoke. But I felt watching the absolute chaos there, the collapse of so much of the retail-facing ceramics industry, that it was really important that we were generating the orders in London. I mean, kind of from a London-based office, understanding the market. So, because of that, we were very, very quick we had a transactional website long before we knew what it was.
Right.
I remember trying to get onto it and HTTP slash. It's so complicated. But it meant that, we just weren't we were behaving like a design and marketing company with a factory. And Big Stop was being my own manufacturer. I mean, a really massive, massive impediment. and at the same time, way the best thing about the business. There were various men who knew better begged me not to go ahead with the manufacturing, because what happened was I made with Sam for 5 years, and he got into financial difficulty. I was forced to buy his business over the weekend.
Wow.
Because at that stage we were going into Harry. I mean, I got accounts with all the big stores, and everyone I wanted to be in was interested. I couldn't afford to let it go into liquidation and try and pick up the pieces several months, like maybe more than a year later. I knew we'd have lost the momentum and somebody else would have picked it up, and da-da-da. And so some of my relations, some of Matthew's relations, and a friend of his put up the money. And that was marvellous and terrible and marvellous and terrible. It's been marvellous and terrible ever since. But it is the thing that kept me in the business. If it had been a design and marketing company, I would have sold it. I'd have grown it faster. I'd have sold it long ago. And I don't know if, given that the business did finance our family life, put the children through school, see us living, they grew up in a nice old rectory in Norfolk. It did all the things I wanted it to do. The fact that it hasn't made me rich in my old age doesn't seem to matter very much. I live in a mission house in the East End. I rent a house in the East End. I mean, my life is absolute. I have not made a big financial success. I've made several men quite rich, right. But I'm still there because I really care about keeping the factory going.
Right.
That's sort of the only thing you make so many, you doubt a lot of the decisions you make in your life. I've never doubted that. I am so proud of every single person who works for EB, and that the whole team here in London and in Stoke, and the amazing things that they do. Walking into that each time, I feel, is a massive privilege, and the greatest privilege of my life. And so when my father was, really incredibly, I think he was terrified on my behalf that I was going into manufacturing. So much so I didn't even tell him about my dealings with the union. I had two terrific run-ins with them. I've always respected them and sought to work with them. And if you tell the truth and you're honest and persistent, these things come right. But he was terrified that I was going into manufacturing. But I did absolutely have the bit between my teeth, and I'm absolutely glad I did that. It's shaped a different business.
Would you say what a lot of people would consider as blocks that we've talked about? Say children, having to deal with everything that you've said, the finances, the bank manager, all these things. Many people would see that as a huge, this block we're talking about.
Looking back, it was impossible. It was entirely unthinkable to have done it. And truly, another part of my mind says I should really have been at home with my babies. There is no winning this particular race that we all set out on now. There's nothing but compromise. I've been judged as a woman in ways that I would never have been judged if I was as a woman and a mother and a wife, that I would not have been as a man and a husband and a father. I felt the hardship of really playing quite a masculine role in my business and in my family life, and that's all quite curious. So it's unexpected. But I guess in a way it's the thing that a lot of entrepreneurs are a particular breed, and I don't think many people, I think if you're not up for it, you will fall away from it. I'm a one-trick pony. I didn't have lots. I really admire people who go on to do something else and something else, but only if the businesses that they've sold prosper.
Yeah.
I don't. I think I find the fate of some of the brands. Cath Kidston's is a sad fate. I loved that brand so much, and we're the same vintage, and we used to hang out, moaning to each other mildly at trade fairs for years. God, I mean, I'm sure she doesn't mind, but it's a complex thing. I've got kids. They're not called Bridgewater. They'll walk away from it, I guess, in the end.
Yeah. I mean, how have you kind of overcome these things that have come at you? Because there's been so much. I mean, one thing that's come over really strongly from talking to you is this overriding passion, particularly for the factory in Stoke, for the business that you've created.
That's sort of oddly, I didn't exactly know it, but an adherence to the idea that we would never make any pottery anywhere but Stoke, and that we do that through thick and thin, and we jockey through some, terrible cash squeezes, dishonest defections, union spats. Once you commit, in my worldview, you commit. That means it's going to happen. I mean, you don't stop.
So you look at it as something to be overcome rather than something to stop you.
Yeah. And it's worth it because it's the livelihood of hundreds of people and their dependents. And I find that a very simple kind of, why do you do what you do? Because of the privilege of employing all those people. And that keeps me honest, keeps me straight. And I can doubt all kinds of things when I'm, sleeping badly. But I never, ever worry about the factory, which is odd because, I mean, we're now having a go because I realise that for its own future security, there may not be a mad person like me to own it in the future. I don't think any of my kids will. In which case, its best future is being a bit more efficient than it is now. And that's fun. I mean, I'm quite enjoying that. Working out, taking a much more engineering view of it. I was so frightened of the potters, the way they crashed their particular car. I didn't know who to ask, really. And I think we're of a size now to be able to attract really interesting, clever engineers. And that's fascinating. Wish I'd done that a long time ago now. That's what happens is you finally get to the point where you can afford it, or you're a big enough proposition to get the right people, and then you think, oh my Lord, this is a different matter. Working with people who actually do really know what they're doing, whereas we've been busking it one way or another. I mean, and I guess that was what people like my dad could see, but it feels like an interesting thing to have done.
Definitely. And the last question is, what tips would you give people who are looking to develop a business, to become an entrepreneur, who are struggling in their business? We're in really bizarre times with, COVID, cost of living. There's so much stuff being thrown at people in business at the moment. What advice would you share? What tips would you give?
Okay. Once I've said all the things about how tough it is and how compromised you will be if you stick with your project, there is still a freedom and a flexibility in my life. I mean, it's notional because, I'm juggling a lot of, fewer now, my kids are grown, but, juggling a lot of responsibilities and feeling guilty and inadequate in every department, awful, ripped feeling. But nevertheless, if you can make your business work, it can work for you as well. And it is, I think, the freedom of it has suited me very well. I mean, the autonomy, the agency it's given me in my own life. So if you are that, I am a team player. I loved team sports at school. But I'm also, I think I'm better at being my team rather than, I don't know if I'd ever have made a good employee. I think there's lots of, I think yourself, whether you want to be helping row someone else's boat or build your own and work out how to row it. And it is kind of daft. I'd say get some relevant experience, i.e., it doesn't need to be in a pottery in my case, but the Jersey Girls were great for me in that it was a creative company with creative driving principles. Sure. And two women who wanted and really enjoyed the freedom, but they weren't hugely ambitious. I loved that about them. Unfortunately, the man I married was very, very ambitious.
Right.
I think saw it as money funny, actually. I think all the men around me have seen it as a moneymaker, and I've never really thought of it as that. I love the designing. I love the wares. I love how the customers. I adore talking to the customers, and the perfect thing, the perfect paradigm of it is the factory doors, where someone very jolly, always someone from the city, leads a troop of overexcited shoppers who find it's the first timers that you really like to see, and they take them around the factory, and it's your dream of a factory. It's profoundly analog. In a perplexing world, it's the business that you want. You think lots of people think, oh, if I started a business, it would be just like this. You can totally access and understand every part of it. And they get to talk to the casters, the dippers, the fettlers, the decorators, the furnacemen, the selectors, all the way around, who really love to chat. And some of them are hilariously funny and naughty. But for them, some of them say to me that the customers come out enchanted. And I think it's an unusually good situation to get that feedback on your work.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of it is quite repetitive tasks, but you're in I'm fascinated by the dynamics of the community of 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 people, and what happens if you're a decent employer and make their lives run so much better.
Yeah.
Because they work to live, and they're really, really good at that. And you can see how sad it is to have lost all the factories and the foundries and the mines and all.
Sure. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously. So really, I guess your tips would be that it needs to be bigger than money. It needs to be a passion, because it is hard.
Otherwise, how could you spend your, the biggest part of your life energy on something that's just about making money, or just about beating someone else, or whatever? There's got to be you've got to have a big love for some element of what you're doing.
Mm. And you've also said a few times about how important it is to ask for help and seek out help and get experience. Because again, people think they need to do it on their own, and if they're asking for help, it's a sign of weakness. That's not the case, but that's what some people think, isn't it?
No, because they do it knowing that you'll pay it on down the line. That's one of my favourite phenomena. That you know perfectly well that once you understand that I can ring anyone as long as I don't waste their time.
Yeah.
And ask them anything. They might say off, or they're much more likely to say, I think this is what you need to know about, or whatever. And some of them will take a lot of trouble. And I think you do that instinctively, knowing that you're going to pay that back down the line. And that's one of the nicest things about it, I sometimes think. There's a sort of unspoken community feeling about it.
No, I love that. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
Don't be worried. I mean, I think some of the best breakthroughs have come when you take on, you understand the next, you start to get your head around the next phase and the next challenge. You might have to take someone on and pay them as much as twice as what you're paying yourself. Obviously, you hope they might take a risk and on the results they're going to generate. By and large, they don't. And that can feel very confusing. Often that's what you've got to do. So I think I said that very early on, as you get bigger, you finally start to get the very superior power and experience. I mean, that's inevitable. But there's sometimes you should try and leapfrog forward a little bit more and scrape the money together, pay yourself a bit less for a while in order to get that person to pull you through into the next kind of level.
Sure. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for listening. As I said at the start, if you have got the book already, please do consider leaving a review. I'd be really, really grateful. If you want to go and see all the beautiful things that Emma Bridgewater creates and the new designs and some of the absolute traditional must-have pieces, head over to www.emmabridgewater.co.uk and enjoy. Thanks so much.